So next we have Andrew McKinney. So Andrew is the OER coordinator for the Office of Library Services at CUNY Central Office, where he helps to coordinate New York State's generous OER funding with his colleague Ann Fidler. He's a graduate of the CUNY Graduate Center's PhD program in sociology and has worked on open educational projects at multiple CUNY campuses for the last decade, focusing mostly on open source educational technology and open pedagogy. He hopes that his experience at so many different levels of the CUNYverse allows him to advocate for OER and open education to as many constituencies as possible.
It's a bit.ly, so. Let's see if it works. It's not a huge deal, does it? Okay.
It should be.
You got my slash. All right, great. I too like to walk around, so I will be around here.
Just let's give one more round of applause to Karen. That was great. There is going to be, although I don't know, it's not mirroring, so we've got. Sorry about that.
It's still on mine.
Yeah, I think it's a display issue. Anybody? This is a PC, so I'm lost entirely.
Oh, it's showing up here.
Yeah.
Let's see.
But just on the ungrading thing, so I went to a very bottom tier high school and then transferred to a very top tier high school, and the grade situation became very different and very damaging and punishing, I found. And I ended up going to Hampshire College, for those of you familiar. No grades, no majors kind of school. So I'm very pro ungrading and the general sort of lack of, what's the word I'm looking for? Value, explanatory value that grades often have for students. So if you would also like to talk to me about that later, I will talk to you forever. Okay, thank you. Very, very appreciate it. So, folks at CSI asked me to talk about just generally both open access and OER. As Christina said, I'm not a librarian, so my capacity to talk about open access is a little lighter. I'll go a little lighter on that, and we'll talk more about OER. Also, I have the sort of unfortunateness to take you from the wanting to run through a wall for open pedagogy inspiration that Karen gave you to get back into some more sort of technical details. But hopefully it's not too boring. You can interrupt me if you have questions. I don't have a ton of content planned here because I didn't want to overwhelm you. So, although who knows, maybe it will overwhelm you. I don't know. So I wanted just to start, and this is, I think Karen covered this pretty well. Sort of what do we mean when we use the word open, right? I think if you know anything about open source software or open pedagogy or open education, over the last 20 years, this has become sort of just a word that gets thrown around about a lot of things. I think you see like, open government, open data, all this stuff that sometimes is what it portends to be, and sometimes it isn't. So this is a quote from Audrey Waters. If you're not familiar with Audrey Waters' work, I would absolutely encourage you to seek it out. She writes at a blog called Hack Education. She has a book that should come out sometime next year it's on teaching machines that I'm extremely excited about. So she asks, what do we mean when we use the word open? Free, as Karen said, open access, open enrollment, open data, open enrollment. Remember the MOOC, right? Which it's unfortunately named, I think, in a lot of ways. And sort of an unfortunate time in educational technology at a certain point. There's open data, openly licensed materials, as in OER, or open source software, open for discussion, open for debate, open to competition, open for business. I think, just want to take a quick moment to talk about this open for competition, open for business thing. One of the things that you're seeing in the world of publishing in the last probably 3 to 4 years, right? So, as Karen mentioned, there has been a sort of plateau / slight downward tick in the overall cost of educational materials. Whether that's the issue around OER as a sort of competition against the publishers is an open question. I don't know that we can really prove that per se, But what we can prove is that they are moving into digital way more than print, right? Like that's a thing that's very much happening. And that's a thing that's very much happening around homework platforms and generally sort of software to serve those materials. So what you're seeing is publishers taking OER that has been openly licensed, right, often with a CC BY, and locking it back into a paywalled situation around that homework platform, right? And so why does that work for a publisher, right? They didn't pay for the content. They didn't pay for the development. They didn't pay for the copy editing. And if they did, they did a few revisions, which is much, much more cost effective for the publisher, right? So is that what we mean by open, right? Do we mean that we're producing all sorts of things like they do in the open source software movement, and then courting and allowing for business to do this? Now, David Wiley, who I'll talk about a little bit more in a second, just put out a blog post a couple days ago arguing that the open source movement was successful because it courted business, right? It said, you're more than welcome to use the software that we've produced for your business ends. And the argument is that then that just produces a much larger set of users, a much larger set of producers that then allows the open source movement to continue. I'm not so sure that I buy that for open content, as they would put it, but that's maybe a conversation for another day. So I just want to generally just kind of keep this in mind. I like this open-ended intellectual exploration. I think that works for open pedagogy the best. But I want you to keep it in mind all day. When we use this word open, which I think is desperately, terribly overused, just what do we mean? Let's try to be precise about what we mean. Or maybe not even precise. Maybe remain open-ended about open. So, just want to talk quickly about open access a little bit. Again, like I said, it's not really the total subject of what I'm trying to talk about, because partly it's less about teaching and it's more about research, right? Obviously, as Karen showed you, you can use open access tools in your teaching or open access research in your teaching to a great degree. It's open. Students can go find it. And I'll point out one thing about open access that I think is very important in an open pedagogy situation. So we're keeping research open to the world. Now, if you know anything about academia or about research, you know that people love to make statements. They love to make declarations. So there are several open access declarations, right, that are out there. I think there are 3 that are sort of canonical. This original one from '02 is the Budapest Open Access Initiative, which had a lot of different people in it. People from the Open Society Initiative, George Soros's OSI, people from Creative Commons, people from a number of different places. Well, maybe not Creative Commons. I don't know that they were in existence yet, but people from the general open research and open education movement were all there. So they say by adding open access to this literature, we mean it's free availability on the public internet, permitting any user to read, download, copy, distribute, print, search, or link to the full text of these articles, crawl them for indexing, which is a very important aspect here. If you know anything about scholarly communication, which maybe you do, maybe you don't, one of the more interesting things you see from an Elsevier, from these large sort of publishers and journals, or people who run journals, one of the things they're stopping you from doing lately, because they want you to use their tools, which they're going to charge your university for, is stopping you from crawling and indexing large databases, right? So one of the things you can do, and what's really useful with sort of large databases of open access research, is you can do some machine learning, right, where you're crawling and indexing this huge sort of set of things so you can find out more about research writ large, right? This is of great value to people who know how to do this, to sort of see what are the gaps in research. What are some things that we could learn more about sort of large data sets of research itself? One of the things that Elsevier does not want you to do is to do that, right? So I think this is a very important aspect that sometimes gets lost about open access. So also we're passing them as data to software or using them in other lawful purposes without financial, legal, or technical barriers. I like this technical barrier, right? That's an important aspect here. Other than those inseparable from gaining access to the internet itself. So if you can get to the internet, you should be able to get it. I think that's a really important point here. So the only constraint in reproduction and distribution, the only role for copyright in this domain should be to give authors control over the integrity of their work and the right to be properly acknowledged and cited, right? So the open access movement in general is both for the public, right, to have more access to research. What is the use of research? What is the purpose of research other than to better our knowledge, our general knowledge of the world and of ourselves? But also it's to give authors rights, right? And to keep those rights. That's oftentimes, if you've ever published something in a sort of, in a journal that doesn't allow you to have a preprint, or it doesn't allow you to share that other research, I think maybe this can make a little sense to you. Also in open access, you will see these two terms tossed around a lot, green and gold open access. This comes from a open access database called Sherpa Romeo, and what they will do is they will mark journals green or gold, and then there's some other colors that they'll put in there that's more of a hybrid journal or whatnot. So green OA means that the author publishes in a journal and is able to archive that article in a publicly available repository. Green OA journals are journals that allow for self-archiving of this nature, right? So generally you'll see when someone says green OA, what they mean is self-archiving. That means that you can take the article that you wrote, that is your intellectual property, and share it with others outside of the journal, right? Sometimes that's only in the preprint, meaning that it's before it's gone through the review process. Other times it's not.
And you have to pay for it.
And sometimes you have to pay for it. So we also have the Gold OA. So Gold OA journals allow for free and immediate access to articles via the publisher website. So it's on the website. Now, Karen brings up a very important point. There is a thing called an APC, or the Article Processing Charge, or Publishing Processing. Again, I'm not a librarian. So APCs are a very interesting problem, right? So if you're a journal, you can understand what you're sort of doing is it's not easy to publish a journal, right? If you've ever been involved with any kind of journal, you know it takes an enormous amount of work. There are costs involved, right? So just releasing that article into the world without charging for access to it creates a sort of a real sort of revenue problem for them, right? So the publishers have sought to solve this by the APC, right? So the sort of one problem, you get into some, a more dystopic sort of outcome for this would be if the APCs get so high that an institution like CSI, right, which is constantly underfunded, like all of our CUNY schools, doesn't have in reserve a large amount of money to pay for faculty to release their research as green or gold OA, right? And so, there are these open access initiatives that say all research that's produced must be open access. If you get a government grant, right, that research that's produced from that government grant has to be open access. If your institution doesn't have money to pay for that APC, then what happens to that research? So what we end up with is, this again, dystopic. This is not necessarily what's going to happen. But an end game of this could be only institutions, like elite institutions that have huge endowments, would be able to be publishing research, right? Now, again, there are a lot of people who already understand that this is a problem and who are already thinking about ways to get around this. And again, if you're publishing with an open access journal, there's one at CUNY called the Journal of Interactive Technology and Pedagogy that is open access, that you can publish in, that is freely available. There's no APC. There are plenty of journals that have this model already, right? So it's a matter of just getting the research out. So I don't want to take up too much time. So we do have a commitment to open access here at CUNY. We do a lot of our self-archiving, right, in institutions all over the world, ends up happening in your institutional repository, right? So we have an institutional repository. It's called CUNY Academic Works. I just want to say, if you want to, this is on the last slide. If you want to follow along with this, or you want to look at these slides, this has a link to Academic Works if you're not familiar with it. If you just click on the picture. I have a bit.ly, it's just bit.ly/OER101CSI, that's all caps at the end. Bit.ly can be a little weird if it's not, you don't do the case sensitive stuff. So in my office, Megan Wacha is our librarian who works with CUNY Academic Works. Who's your Academic Works person on campus here? It's Anne. So, talk to Anne if you have a question. So again, this is going to be a self-archiving situation. If you have access to your preprints, it should be in your contract. when Megan gives presentations about this, she often has several slides that says, "I am not a lawyer." So, that's going to be a conversation that you're going to need to have with Anne, maybe with Megan, but also, be looking at the contract for whatever you published, right? But again, it's very important. Having more research available to more people is just generally good for humanity, right? That's what we're trying to do. So, that's for research, right? That's, again, not what I am hired to work on at CUNY Central. What I am hired to work on is for open educational resources. Now, I'm glad that Karen gave a sort of swift overview, so I didn't feel, I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to do it all over again, and people are going to look at me weird. So, let me raise your hand if you feel like you already know what open educational resources are. See Susan. Okay, so like a nice 50 split here. Very important point that Karen brought up earlier, which is, look, we could talk about open textbooks, right? That's an element of OER. There are plenty of people who, one for one, take their commercial textbook and then go and get an OpenStax textbook or go to the open textbook library and find a textbook and just replace it, right? But that's, even in the original definitions of OER, that was never exactly what people had in mind. So there are a number of sort of, OER, like a lot of new things, has a lot of people who sort of say, well, I said this first, or, well, I have a competing definition from, 2001, but I think generally what we look to as the canonical definition of OER is this Hewlett Foundation statement from 2002, which says OER are teaching, learning, and research materials in any medium, digital or otherwise, that reside in the public domain or have been released under an open license that permits no-cost access, use, adaptation, and redistribution by others with no or limited restrictions. Now, OER as a term comes from a group of people working at UNESCO. Now, a fun fact that Ann Fiedler and I learned, when was that, July, from someone who was actually at that original convening. It's called Open Educational Resources. They had other names, but it's called Open Educational Resources because OER also worked in French and their other names didn't. So it could have been a number of other things, just a fun fact. So again, what we're talking about here are any number of materials. It's not just textbooks. It could be assignments, it could be slides, it could be research, it could be data, it could be any number of things. As long as we're in the public domain and the release under an open license that permits no-cost access. Again, to go back to what do we mean by open, right? There are a bunch of companies who are serving OER for cost. So, technically, not OER anymore. So, but again, gets into our use, adaptation, and redistribution by others. So, that brings us to, as Karen mentioned, the 5 R's. Show of hands, 5 R's, anybody? A little less than people familiar with what OER is. Okay, so David Wiley blogs at a website called Open Content. He is also the Chief Education Officer for Lumen Learning. Also, until very recently, the steward of the Open Education Conference, came up with this extremely useful framework for open educational resources that he originally called the 4 R's before he added a 5th, right? So our 5th is this first one. It's retain, the right to make, own, and control copies of the content. Important aspect here, right? So one of the things you're seeing the publishers are doing a great deal right now is, again, serving things digitally, offering things for rent, or offering things under packages that are basically just automatically build rentals that they call inclusive access, right? So it might be originally an OER, but it's not going to be an OER because what happens when you rent something? You don't have it after a certain period of time, right? And so it's no more retained. This is a very important aspect to me about OER. And I think a lot of the teaching and learning platforms and styles that we do, this goes back to disposable assignments, but it also goes into some of the technologies that we use, right? I used to teach at Baruch when I was a graduate teaching fellow and as an adjunct. And, I did all this stuff in Blackboard, right? I'm no longer there, although I still work for CUNY. Most of my classes are gone, right? So once your student is not on Blackboard anymore, unless they've downloaded it, which is an important thing for them to remember, always archive, right? Very important. But once they're no longer at the university, they can't access that anymore, right? So important thing to keep in mind here. So beyond retain, we have reuse, so the right to use the content in a wide range of ways, so taking it off a platform, taking it somewhere else. We have revise, the right to adapt, adjust, modify, or alter the content itself. Very important for open pedagogy, right? The ability to take something and have students revise it and move and do other things with it. Also very tightly related is the right to remix, or the right to, I think revise and remix get kind of sort of used interchangeably a lot. The right to combine the original or revised content with other materials to create something new. So you're adding new stuff in, whether that be video or images or other text, and putting it together. You know, there's a lot of stuff you can do to sort of take up openly licensed things in one area and from another area and put them together and create a new text. And the right to redistribute, which of course is probably one of the most important ones here. The right to share copies of the original content, your revisions, or your remixes with others without a violation of copyright, right? So I think the important thing to ask here, but wait, how do I do that? This seems wonderful, it seems amazing, but there is a thing called copyright that people have to deal with on a regular basis. And so how do I do this? I just want to quickly say that these next 6 slides are adapted from some work that I did with Pamela Thielman at Baruch, just to give attribution to our creatively licensed work. So, give me a show of hands, you feel moderately knowledgeable about copyright. I'm going to put my hand halfway because I'm not entirely sure, right? It's a thing that you know, in your everyday life, and I think often, you know, one of the things I sometimes do with talking about OER or open access or whatever is I start with like a cheesy, like, the internet superhighway slide, right? To say, you know, copyright was just chugging along, doing great, not real problematic for a very long time until the internet, right? Which completely, and particularly at that point of redistribution, completely muddles the entire thing. You have a tool that can completely undermine copyright whenever it wants, right? For those of my folks in their teens and 20s and the 90s, you know, thinking about LimeWire or Napster or what have you. So we have copyright, we have all things that are all rights reserved. That's a large amount of the content in the world is all rights reserved, even if it's being sort of pushed around and no one cares. Then we have our public domain, which things that something's been released completely or the copyright has expired. There's a lot of legislation that goes into the world that continues to extend the years that something is copyright eligible. There's a sort of like apocryphal, not really totally true argument around this that all of this comes back to Disney, because a lot of the sort of year that copyright is going to run out at like 75 years or whatever traces back to the first Steamboat Willie cartoon, which is the beginning of Mickey Mouse, right? So it's Disney that's controlling all of these things. That's not entirely true, but it's an interesting idea, right? That part of what keeps copyright in hold is majorly capitally invested copyright holders, right? So again, we've got all rights reserved, we've got public domain, we've got this very gray area in between. So first, we have, again, our all rights reserved, our holder of copyright retains all rights under copyright law, no reproduction, no distribution or derivative use without permission from the rights holder. Again, all against our 5 R's, all against our definition of OER. That's not OER at all if it's copywritten, right? So public domain, we have copyright that has expired, been forfeited, been expressly waived, or is inapplicable, cut off for most expirations in 1923, again, Steamboat Willie, and derivative works are permitted. Now, obviously, things that are public domain are OER, right? That's fine. But what you've done in OER is you've completely taken all of your rights as a creator and just given them away, right? Some people are very willing to do that. I think that's great. But not everybody is, right? So we need some kind of solution. So partly in our gray area, however, we have what is called fair use. And it's gray in the sort of best and worst ways, right? So fair use, it's also called fair dealing in a lot of other countries and mostly in Europe, is a doctrine. It is not a law. Again, I am not a lawyer. Your librarian friends are not lawyers either, unless they are. I don't know. Okay. Right, just being clear. So it's a checklist, right? It's like a rubric that you use to grade a student, right? Or to evaluate, I'm sorry. You're not grading. Very important. And that's actually a very good point here, because it is about evaluation. It's much grayer than an actual grade, right? So things you have to keep in mind when you're considering whether or not something that maybe you're creating an OER, maybe you're creating new content that could be fair use. So you have to consider the purpose and character of the use, including whether such use is of commercial nature or is for nonprofit educational purposes. So you're thinking to yourself, oh, well, number one, I'm using it for nonprofit educational purposes. I'm totally fine. Not true. That's just one. So we have the nature of the copyright work. Is it a piece of music? If you know anything about the sampling wars of the 90s in the music industry, the nature of the copyright work, are you sampling the chorus and melody, which is technically sort of what sells the song? Or are you sampling a 2-second drum break, right? That's a very different concept. What the nature of that copyrighted work is very different. So the amount of substantiality of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole. So I like to use, as an example here, let's say you're teaching a poetry class, and you have a new edition you're assigning to your students a new edition of like an Audre Lorde book, right? But what you're actually assigning your students, you're assigning them like one poem. Maybe that's fair use, right? Just one poem might be available on the web, might be in a number of different places. Well, let's say what you really want for the students is to assign them the introduction that's by a noted scholar, right? That's what you want them to read. Maybe it's only 6 pages, right? And the book itself is 250. However, what it does is number 4. It's the effect of the use upon the potential market or the value of the copyrighted work, right? No one's going to, the reason that new collection has been published is because of that head matter, right? It's because of the introduction by the noted scholar. So the publisher can actually make an argument that that's not fair use because it adversely affects the effect of the use upon the potential market, right? So it's very gray, it's very difficult. When you go into fair use, there's some stuff that you shouldn't feel that bad about, like if you just use one image out of 1,000 images, okay, all right, fine. Again, not a lawyer, don't quote me. However, what you're doing is you're getting into a deeply gray area of things, right? Okay, oh geez, okay, all right. Talking too long. So that allows us to come to, well, we need a solution for that, right? And so that solution is the Creative Commons license. So Creative Commons license, I think we briefly touched upon this, but they break out into 4 sort of elements. Attribution, so our basic basic Creative Commons license, when you give a Creative Commons license to something, is CC BY, which is the only restrictions on this at all are that when you use the content again, you have to attribute where you originally got the content, right? Our other elements of the license are share alike, which says if you use that content somewhere else, you have to use the exact same license that the original content comes from. So if it was CC BY SA or share alike, that means your new content that incorporates that old content has to be CC BY SA. That's how you have to license it. There's non-commercial, which means that people can do all the things that you do with a Creative Commons work, except you can't sell it, right? You can't sell it for profit. Now, there's some gray area in here about what that actually means. Printing companies, right, can charge for something that's CC BY NC because the charge is for the printing and it's not for the content, right? That's actually a court case that went forward a couple of years ago. And then our last one here is we're controlling what kind of revising we can do, right? So this no derivatives means that there can be no derivative works that are produced. Now, this is a little gray. Also, what a non-derivative use looks like is a little difficult sometimes. You can take something and put it in another context, and oftentimes that's not understood as a derivative use. What we're talking more about is sort of more pure sort of revision and a more substantive remix. Again, this is legally binding, right? This is written by lawyers. In our what's in a license, we have what they call the 3 layers. So there is legal code in this. These have gone through the courts. These are legally binding. So again, whenever you put something out that you've licensed, whatever license you put on there is legally binding. Again, you are by nature going to get credit for it unless there is a CC public domain license that you can use. So we've got our 3 levels. A, we've got machine readable code. So there's HTML in any Creative Commons license that you put either in a document or on the web that allows for when a search engine crawls it right? If you can filter by CC license, and that'll pop up. So they need that HTML. There's the human readable element, which when you read a license, when you see that CC by NCSA, that's our human readable. And then if you click through into a CC license, you will see the full legal deed, right? We're talking legalese that you probably don't want to sort of waste your time reading, but it's very useful if you are in any kind of dispute around the license, right? So this is a chart that I'm not super wild about, but is very useful if we're thinking about this basically. So these are all our licenses, right? So these licenses can be sort of combined in all these, in 6 different ways. So we've got our public domain at the top. That's our most, free is the word that I am not particularly fond of, okay. And we've got our OER that are the top. So anything that doesn't have the no derivatives, right? We call that OER, because once we say no derivative works, it's no longer fitting our 5 R's, right? So this is again, bit.ly/OER101CSI, all caps. That will get you here. So I think Karen covered this pretty well. So I want to quickly say that about the student debt thing. I used to work at a student loan company, don't ask. Very terrible job. But the vast majority of student loan default, right, is for students who have debt that is under $5,000. Why do you have student debt that's under $5,000? Because you only went to school for a semester, right? Why did you only go to school for a semester? Because you couldn't really afford it, and you couldn't afford, again, the costs that are way above the actual tuition costs, right? So that's a really important thing in my mind all the time. And student loan debt default, again, shout out to Joe Biden, you cannot get rid of that in bankruptcy, right? So it is debilitating as debt. So trying to keep students out of that as much as possible, very important. So, you know, at CUNY we've saved tens of millions of dollars for students in the last 2.5 years. We're extremely proud of it, we're doing a great job. But that's not it. So as again, Karen said, there's a lot of stuff to talk about here. There's decentralization of knowledge. I think we talked about that a little bit, and I think that's really useful. There's multimodal possibilities that we can do. Love this, everything about students learning the internet, right? And engaging with information literacy, engaging with creating content, and not being dictated to. I think that about digital citizenship stuff is maybe the most important thing we can really think about at this time and place. And again, I think it models really good information literacy practice for students, which again is maybe one of the most important things we can be teaching students right now. So just quickly, before I'm done, again, these are in the slides. They're all links. You can look to it. I just want to highlight 2 things. We do have what's called an OER Commons Microsite. Terrible nomenclature. Basically, it is a repository of curated OER material that are both from CUNY and outside of CUNY. It's called CUNY Open Ed. You can just call it, it's like opened.cuny.edu. You can go there and search for stuff. There's a really great tool that allows you to align a piece of content to a course that you're teaching. So if someone is searching for a certain course, that metadata will allow them to surface that content that you've approved. So I think that's a really great tool. And also, we are about to, hopefully, knock on wood, shout out to procurement, we are about to have a university-wide Pressbooks instance, right? We are going to have that, I swear to God, it's actually going to happen. It's been a long time coming. So you will have the ability to do all the wonderful things that one of the wonderful things that Karen was talking about, to produce content with your students, have access to the Rebus community, which are tremendous people who really know what they're doing, and that's great. So you can look through the rest of these. There's other sort of CUNY-specific things to it. Also, this is just a really nice thing that Anita Walls from Virginia Tech made, that if you want to think about the differences between open access and OER, it's really great. Again, so one last thing. Again, bit.ly/OER101CSI, and make sure those are all caps. Bitly is a jerk about that kind of thing. All right, thanks.